We need a couple bloopers. Yeah, not gonna lie. You need a blooper reel. This is great.
Today we are recording at the 2024 TroopHR retreat at the Ritz-Carlton in Naples, Florida. I am your host, Taylor Bradley, and I'm joined by two longtime TroopHR members, Zamena Ladak and Josh Saterman. What's really exciting is in the recording of this particular episode, we had to re-record this introduction several times as we had a couple of, we'll call them bloopers. But one of the key themes in this episode is inclusion. So we do want to make sure you're included on the inside joke that we referenced throughout the episode. But guess what? We made it through a final polished introduction, and we are eager to jump into the topics at hand today, which is transformation in the workplace. Now I'll kick it over to our guests for two quick self-introductions.
Hi, my name is Zamena Ladak. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Business Development and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Assemble. We are a leadership development consulting firm, and we focus on people-focused leadership to the forefront of the workplace. And what we do is we bring leadership offsites, we do learning experiences, fractional HR, people operations, and executive coaching. And everything is rooted in our trademark leadership model of candor, courage, and care. But most importantly, I am a mom of three beautiful children that live out on Long Island in New York, and I'm thrilled to be here today.
I'm Josh Saterman. I'm the CEO of Saterman Connect. Saterman Connect is an inclusive leadership HR firm. We specialize in leadership development, culture and engagement, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. We have 3 trademark programs that go back to each of those 3 pillars: Arrive, Drive, Thrive, Power of Language, and Beyond Boarding. Also, most importantly, I have a wonderful daughter and an amazing husband, Maya and Michael. We live in Harlem, New York. We're very proud New Yorkers. And what we love to do in both personal and professional life is to amplify the power of people to drive business results.
I appreciate having both of you on the podcast, so welcome to the pod. What's really exciting about this episode is I feel like we're going to have some laughs.
Oh, yeah.
Just
us together.
Just getting through the introductions has been a journey, but we made it.
We made it.
Other side of the introductions now.
I warmed up for you.
Yeah, you did good. I'm proud of you.
I'm proud of all of us. I think it was a joint effort. But the topic that I want to talk about today is transformation. And what's exciting interviewing the two of you is you have so much exposure to different types of clients, different types of industries. So I'm really interested in learning what your clients are facing this year. But I'd like to start at the ground level, as we do with all of these podcasts, and get an understanding from you, or what are the key hallmarks or a baseline definition of transformation?
So for me, transformation boils down to one word: change. It's about change, but also changing for the better.
I'd like to add, change is what's happening outside of us at all times. When we talk about change leadership, we talk about transition. And when you're transforming, you're recrafting, you're remolding, you're taking what you've learned previously and you're applying it to the future. Sometimes it's learning, sometimes it's relearning, sometimes it's unlearning, sometimes it's repositioning, but change is happening all the time. It's an outside force. The transition part, which is most important to transformation, is how you react to it and are proactive, interactive, intraactive, whether personally or professionally.
So much has happened over the past 3 years alone, maybe 4 years. I feel like it's been a decade backed into 4 years.
For sure.
But forward looking into the rest of 2024, what are 2 or 3 topics that are top of mind for your clients when it comes to transformation and change?
If I'm thinking about things from the lens of inclusivity, of belonging, some of the topics that are really top of mind for my clients are: how do we continue to foster inclusivity and create a place where people feel as though belong when there are so many things happening from a world standpoint, from a political standpoint, just here within the US? And how do we approach that in a way that doesn't make people feel alienated? They don't feel like they're outsiders, but they truly are a part of an organization, no matter what their belief system is.
Statistic prior to pandemic, not because of the pandemic, companies were going through on average about 2 major changes per year. The statistic now is about 10. And so when you think about the models like the Bridges model around endings and neutral zones and new beginnings, and you think about the amount of times that the workforce, individual humans are entering into an ending into a neutral zone and then into a new beginning. Going back to transformation, you're transforming constantly and not getting a chance to fully, as a human, digest one thing before you're moving into the next. So change leadership is critical right now, because just having the mental presence, the mental health, the well-being to be able to be there for yourself, be there for your team, be there for your organization, that's a tremendous amount of mental and physical fortitude. The other side to it is we run a program called Creating Cultural Curiosity. And essentially, curiosity and competence go together, because curiosity is the mindset, competence is the goal. And so working with organizations around inclusion and belonging, the call to action on how you engage, how you fulfill, how you really talk to the workforce, the workplace, and the marketplace, those demands are more present now than ever.
It sounds like a core attribute is change management. What is the practical advice that you're giving to your client groups of, we have these big topics that we need to navigate that can cause a lot of consternation?
Yeah.
Because one thing that I haven't seen happen is someone go, I don't know what's going on, but I bet it's great. In that vacuum of information, usually folks at best are neutral with their response, but more likely are feeling negative. So what is that practical advice that you're giving to leaders of how should they frame up the topic and then a plan to navigate through that change management?
3 things come to mind. First is breathe. We're so close to it. So it's the definition of being right up against that tree trunk and seeing the bark, or taking 20 paces back and looking at the forest and then saying, now what do you see? The second thing is the world is not binary. Leaders are making more decisions now than ever with limited information. So as much analytics and as much data and as much AI as we have is as much as we don't have because of exponential growth. Then the question is, how do you give yourself permission to make a mistake and course correct? So giving yourself grace and understanding that making the decision doesn't mean that's the final decision. But just going forward and knowing that you have the fortitude, the resilience, the persistence, and hopefully the case, the team, to be able to bounce back and make good decisions in flight. And then the last thing I would add to it is really investing in your organization around the why, the what, and the how. I love how Simon Sinek talks about purpose, because understanding what the goal is about setting clear expectations. Expectations can evolve, and people need to know what is the goal so they can understand how they can put the practical against it. So marrying that strategy to tactic and being really clear as a C-suite, as a leader, as a board, that connectedness is priceless.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Josh. And I think at the helm of all of this is the importance of communication and really ensuring that throughout all of this, whether there are mistakes, whether we're like, this is the decision we're making right now, and it could be something different in the future, but just being very communicative and as transparent as possible, understanding that there sometimes are limitations is really important. And what I often tell my leaders as I'm coaching them is put yourself in the shoes of your employee. And I'm sure we can all think back to a time in our careers where we were on the other side. And how did we want to be treated? What did we want out of that? And try to apply that. And that's empathy coming in as well.
I love what you just said, because it really elevates the EQ. And the pressure that CEOs are facing to have all the answers, it really talks about that communication is a team effort.
Exactly.
It's about the team and really being aligned around it so you can connect with your workforce, workplace, and marketplace together.
Absolutely. I'm a huge advocate of leaders showing their vulnerability. There are not limitations, but you want to tread that also mindfully. But I think it's important for employees to see their leaders be vulnerable, because it gives them, first of all, it gives them permission as well. And number 2, it also allows them to see that, hey, my CEO, my C-suite, my leaders, they're human.
Yeah.
And they're not perfect. And they're going to make mistakes. And that's okay.
During the pandemic, you saw many in the C-suite turn to the CHROs, the executives in HR, because of their strength with EQ. So I'm glad that this topic was brought up. You saw HR teams expand. And then in the layoffs of 2022, HR teams, primarily in tech, have been decimated.
Mm-hmm.
And with that framing, where do you feel that we are today with the expansion of HR teams how can you drive a impact with a lean tech-enabled team?
We have to start with the trend of HR. And for those of us who were around long enough, remember what was called personnel.
Uh-huh.
And so we have to bring a little humor to the conversation because the world of HR today is not personnel. Human resources is compensation, it's benefits, it's business partners, it's operations, it's learning and leadership, learning and development, talent assessment, talent recruitment. Companies are great when they have great people motivated that work with them, for them, with them, alongside them. I am on this absolute, and I'll call it rampage, to scream from the rafters that human resources, they are not a support function. They are part of G&A, right? General administration. Just like finance has been elevated over the years, so should human resources, because we are your partners to solve for the business. And the business starts with your people.
I'm a huge proponent of actually not even calling it human resources anymore and calling it people. It is, we lead people.
Yeah.
And without people, I said it before, without people, you're not going to have a company. It's exactly what you said. It starts with the people.
And I think the trend here is you notice now that those companies that understand the power of that are investing in HR talent to be partners.
And when you see organizations who invested in their people teams at the height of the pandemic, and then now you're seeing them let them go and lay them off, it sends a message. And it's not a favorable message, and they need to be mindful of that and what impact that's going to have and is having, as you're saying, Josh, on their culture.
And we actually discussed this in a prior episode with Rebecca Taylor from Skill Cycle. Was HR, at least what I've seen, were in positions where they were either dismissed or missed some of the warning signs when they were doing extreme hiring in 2021, 2022. At some point, there was a diminishing returns on revenue per FTE. So going to your point before, the data was important. And one of the worst things that you can do is if you're not hiring in a scalable way, it's going to lead to a layoff. It's going to lead to that negative impact in the culture. In fairness, there were some cases where people did moonshot projects and they just didn't work out. And I think that's part of the industry. But for the listeners that have gone or are going through layoffs, what advice would you have to them on how do they maintain the commitment to the people that are surviving that layoff?
You know, as somebody who has, you know exactly where I'm going. Somebody who has navigated a lot of layoffs and has been on the side of making the decisions. And let me tell you, those were some sleepless nights because those are people that were impacting. What I think is the most important, it's going to suck no matter what. What I think is most important, though, it really comes back to communication and being as communicative as possible, because you have to realize that at the end of the day, you are dealing with people, and these are people's livelihoods, and they're not just numbers, they're not just names on a spreadsheet. They are people. And showing that empathy, showing that compassion as they're navigating it sends a message to the rest of the organization. I remember my husband was working at a really large tech company, very well-known one actually, and he witnessed how people were being laid off. And it actually, for him, when he navigated his own layoff from another organization, and it was terrible, and he saw how others were being laid off here, he was like, wow, like they're treating them with humanity, they're treating them with dignity. And it reaffirmed and revalidated how he felt about the organization and their culture. It sucked that people were getting laid off, but at least there was that humanistic.
I worked for Macy's for many years, and it's a wonderful organization. It has taught me so much over the years. People, Zamena included, that I've met along the way have changed my life. I mean, truly, they've been part of my journey. When I think about layoffs, and your question was so smart to think about, well, who are the people that are left? And how do the people that are left advance? The first time you do the rift, you crack that shield of trust. The next time you do it, now you've really broken the engagement. You've broken that commitment that it is a symbiotic relationship. People go to work for you because they want to work for your values, your mission, your product, your services. And then vice versa, if the company breaks that trust, the quintessential example is, right, like we give the company 2 weeks notice. That's part of the code of ethics, right? But they don't give us 2 weeks notice when they're about to lay us off. When you think about the dynamic of what's now shifting in the workplace, especially when you think about what's happening in the workforce, so generations that have now been raised with that trust and how it's broken, that loyalty directly correlates to how your workforce is engaged in driving your business. The survivalist conversation of who's left is critical because it really is about clarity of mission, understanding the business why and why the workforce reduction or RIF, reduction in workforce, right, is happening. It's clear to keep change management and leadership at the forefront. Anything doesn't happen in 24 hours. Give people time to grieve and ask questions. Am I next? While we can't as leaders guarantee, what we can do is be transparent. We don't know yet. We don't know. We're working on our business, and here are the 3, not 27, but here are the 3 imperatives for us to solve for. And if we can get there, we can turn our business around. We can reposition. We can, right? So having that kind of trust and clarity is earned through the inputs that leaders, peers demonstrate both to the workforce that's been reduced as well as to each other as you move forward.
Josh, you said something that really resonates with me. You talked about giving people that space, that the survivors of a RIF space.
Yeah.
And what always shocks me is that after a RIF takes place, the expectation is the announcements are made, the next day people are still dealing. And then it's like, okay, now we have to resume businesses as usual. And that isn't the space that people need. People need time. It's an end. We go back to the Burgess model of change. Like, it's an ending. People need to come to terms with that. They're saying goodbye to their colleagues. They're also having their own survivor's guilt. And again, it goes back to treating people as though they are people and humans.
It's also that you cannot now expect an organization 70% of the size it once was to do 100% of what was being done before. So the business as usual, BAU, right? Business as usual. Leaders need to step back and prioritize and lead with clarity, because the what's in it for me is, do I now inherit somebody else's job and I'm being paid the same amount to do double the work? And that's real for people. And we should honor and talk about that and express what the expectations are, because that's part of building back that trust, building that relationship, leading with communication, leading with collaboration, and leading with commitment. And those 3 C's of leadership are critical in those moments of extreme pivot or transformation, as we started talking about.
To highlight for our listeners some of the practical takeaways from both your all's answers. First, I'm glad you mentioned the symbiotic relationship. I talk about that all the time on this podcast, is the employee-employer relationship is symbiotic. One success is intrinsically linked to the other. You can do things that benefit the business, but it also has to serve that other half of that equation. Because if those become out of balance, to your all's point, the productivity is just not going to be there. When it comes to layoffs, I've unfortunately had to navigate several of those throughout my career. One of the key things that I've found with executives is you need to tell that personal story to them, not to disrupt making necessary clinical decisions, but if you can afford it, offer severance packages to folks. And the business justification that I've always shared with my leaders is, one, if you treat folks with dignity throughout the exiting process, that will have a positive impact both on the people that are leaving and the people that are staying. And I've always framed it up to them of, if you're letting those folks go, they have to go have a conversation that evening with their spouse, with their family, with their friends, and say, I've been fired today. And I want to make that conversation easier to navigate by being able for them to say, I was fired today, but I was given a severance package that's going to get us through. They're going to do outsourced coaching, those kinds of things. It doesn't take the sting out, but it makes that conversation easier to navigate. And the people staying, they have the ability to look at that and go, we treated people with dignity. The other thing that you brought up that I want to highlight again to listeners is, if you're cutting FTE, you also need to cut scope, because having, to your point, 100% of the work being delegated now to 70% of the people, that equation doesn't work. The other unique thing that I feel listeners could bring up is you can do, as odd as it may sound, promotions during that cycle, to go to someone and say, you're going to take on extra scope, but we're going to recognize that we're giving you more scope and giving you an increase in compensation and or leveling. So those are some of the things that I feel like are tangible takeaways for leaders. To do a pivot now to another topic that we're hearing a lot from the TroopHR members is, what is the path forward for diversity and inclusion? I feel like it's no secret that current legislation in some states or judicial decisions that have been down by the Supreme Court have had a significant effect on this topic. What is your all's take on where we are today?
I'm going to try to keep my emotions at bay right now because it's a very fiery topic.
Speak freely. That's why we're here.
I saw this coming down the pike over a year ago. Like when the decision was overturned and the Supreme Court, I started to also see a downturn in the demand from our clients. And there's something that I have always said, just being in this space, being an advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it's so near and dear to me from a personal standpoint. I have a dream that it is just authentically a part of an organization where there doesn't need to be a CDO. There doesn't need to be a whole separate strategy for DE&I or DEIB. And for us, what we do at Assemble is in everything that we put out there, in our content, in our conversations, in our fractional HR work, we are doing things from the lens of inclusivity with that focus. And that, I think, is how we need to continue to move forward. I'm not saying not to bring special attention to it, but I think in order to get people more on board, it's helping them understand that it needs to just be a part of it. And so we've been trying very hard to do that in what we put out there.
Zamena and I are very connected. Can I talk about our dimensions of diversity?
Go for it.
Okay. For the audience that's listening, right, we are of different religious backgrounds. We are of different gender. We are of different orientation. And yet we have this gorgeous relationship and we talk about it and we engage together and we check on each other. And it's not about the politics or the rhetoric. It's about the connection. So what Zamena just said is so powerful because the world of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is not limited by government. It's such a limited understanding of what it is. It is not metrics. It's not a count of how many people you have. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and ultimately the output of belonging or engagement or that sense of belonging or feeling you have to an organization, that is how we think, act, and operate in everything we do, from communication to strategy building, to our sales strategy, to how we market, to how we handle our finances, supplier diversity. It is to create an ecosystem where everybody can be a part of your organization and be a part of driving results.
This is why I love him so much. We speak each other's language. We get each other. And I truly and firmly believe this, that yes, we're in different organizations, but we are united because our goals are the same. Yes. And together, Josh and I are going to change the world.
Oh, yes. We did a high five. That audience,
that
was
high five. Beautiful, organic high five moment with the listeners, just to take you on the journey with us. The one piece that you mentioned a lot of HR practitioners are struggling with today is when it comes to expanding programs, impact, teams, there has to be a business justification. And what we've been hearing from listeners is when it comes to D&I initiatives, they don't know what to measure or they don't know how to frame up a business justification. I feel that we all know having a diverse workforce that feels like they're included, that they have a safe space to work in is an engaged workforce, which means more productivity, better revenue outcomes for the business. But what advice would you give them to help tell that story?
I have one statistic that I love to share. I have a whole bunch, but I'll pare it down. But the one is, there have been so many studies as of late that have been done to talk about belonging within the workplace and the impact that it has, positive impact that it had. And for an organization that is roughly the size of 10,000 people, it showed when employees felt as though they belonged, right? There were a whole lot of other metrics that are a part of this. Ultimately, it boiled down to a 52 million savings for the company. You save $52 million if you are intentional about creating a space in which your employees belong. You're reducing turnover rate. You're actually increasing productivity. And you are creating a workforce that is more resilient, that is going to stay with you when you go through a market change. And they're going to actually turn out to be more resilient. That is when you are intentional about belonging. And when you're not, the opposite happens.
Likewise, there's a statistic. There's lots of stats out here. The organizations that really want to understand this. They don't need to justify it, right? We don't justify every marketing piece that we do. While there are data points to it, we understand that conversion rate, right, takes time. But it's $8,000 the moment that an entry to middle level person or organization, $8,000 in the first hour that they join the company. That's the cost. And the reason why is because it's people's time, it's people's energy, it's people's preparation. If you think about the billable hour that goes with that. So I say that to say your workforce is an expense. It's also your profit driver. It goes back to people are the innovators that drive your results. So right there, I come back to when we think about metrics and we talk about the conversation, right? There are so many ways to look at your business and think about the ROI of having an engaged workforce, a fulfilled workforce. I also think about, again, full circle, threading the needle of today's conversation. You think about the dynamics that are at play that are new for new leaders. So you think about how much turnover has happened in that C-suite, at the CEO level, within boards. And then you use the word remote workplace, hybrid workplace. So it comes back to just as much as we spend time and we pontificate, we marinate, we percolate over the sales strategy or the conference. How are you doing that for your people? I know Zamena and I are going to be very aligned with because of the workshops and the offsites and the charters and the programs that we bring to leaders. But how many times have you sat as a leader and the head of says to the head of HR, well, in this 3-day offsite, you get an hour to talk about your people. What you put in, you get out.
Yeah.
If you're talking about your people in the span of 24 hours, for one of those hours, that's a metric. That's telling you how much you care about your people.
I love that outline. As a quick hit between the two of you, are there any resources that you feel that our listeners should look up or go to? Because you mentioned a lot of stats out there. Any recommendations on just some handy resources they can refer to?
Well, for selfish reasons, a shameless plug. So we did write a book. It's Arrive, Drive, Thrive. And it's essentially the best leaders are inclusive leaders. And we say, empower your leadership beyond that journey. I would also be remiss if we didn't talk about dear friends of ours, Phan and Mita Malik. And Lan and Mita have done an amazing job between Do This Daily and Reimagine Inclusion, that those are quintessential books in your library, that they will help you, support you, guide you in thinking about how the world of inclusion is quintessential to your business.
At Assemble, we work with leaders every day with that focus of inclusivity and how they communicate and how they're navigating certain situations. How are we doing that through the lens of inclusivity with the focus of the output of belonging? There are so many resources out there by larger organizations, lots of studies that have been done. And I invite people to educate themselves and go out there. There's also, and the name is escaping me, but she is actually a pretty well-known leader from Google. And she has a book that's out there, and I can't think of the name, but I'll think of it after I walk out that door. But a huge focus on belonging and the importance of belonging in the workplace.
For the listeners, we will make sure that all of those links are in the description. So if you click on the description, you'll see all the books that we just mentioned, and we'll track down the name for the Google book as well. And to bring us in for a landing, we'll do a bit of a prolonged lightning round here that I would love your answers. They don't have to be one-word answers. So that's what I mean by a little bit expanded here, is I want to make sure that we leverage both of your all's expertise today. So first, we'll start with an easy question. What hot take HR opinion do you have?
Go for it.
Oh, of course you do. She give it to me. Lightning round. Don't be afraid to use your voice. Your voice is your most powerful tool.
I expect us to answer the same question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. That's a really good one.
That's my routines.
To be fair, you let him go first.
I know. So great for inspiration. You said, don't be afraid to use your voice. I can't use the same one.
You can say +1.
I
We're united.
one then, but don't be afraid to be that lone nut out on the hill dancing. Go out there. And if you believe in something, just go out there and stand for it and watch people join you slowly. Sure.
See, there you go. We had it all along.
Yes.
Next up is when it comes to the workforce, what is one thing that you feel that the workforce wants from an employer in the forward-looking decade?
Oh, there's a lot here. But I will say I've been doing a lot of research just on the various generations. And with the new workforce that is coming in, they want to know that a company is committed to their values. And thank you. And if a company is not, and all it is just putting words out there and it's performative, they are not afraid to say goodbye and challenge and say goodbye, regardless if they have anything else lined up or not. So they're holding companies accountable to what they put out there.
Love everything you just said.
Thank you.
When we do the values exercise with teams, the one word that consistently has come up more now than ever before, essentially, except for the word values, is transparency. And Zamena said it beautifully before, where she talked about communication. Truth talk, baby, truth to power.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I want to take us back to the beginning of our careers. What is one thing with all the experience that you have now that you wish you would have known when you started your career in HR?
For me, it was, I wish I had spoken up. I dealt with a lot in my first years, a lot of inappropriate behaviors. A leader who made racially insensitive comments towards me asked me if I had a bomb under my scarf. And if I could say anything to myself back all those years, I would say speak up and push back and say, you know what, that's not okay.
Do I have time for a little story?
Yes.
There are two women who are incredibly powerful in my life. I'm lucky enough that one of them is still with us and serves as a mentor, a friend, a colleague. But Becky Dannenfelser was a woman that started my career, and at 23, she invested in me. She was a coach. Every Monday at 11 o'clock, she asked me to come to her office. She was a very high-level GMM, for anyone who's familiar with retail terms, right? Person. And I was his assistant. She went through for 15 minutes, and she invested in me. And when she resigned from Macy's and left, she took me into a conference room, and I can remember where I was sitting and how I was sitting. And she pointed to the piece of paper and she said, "What is this?" And I said, "It's numbers. It's BOMs, EOMs, all the financial things that we now know, right?" And she said, "This does not define you. What defines you is your values." Going back to what Zamena said. Fast forward to my career, I'm sitting with Molly Langenstein, who is also now a dear friend of mine. Unfortunately, Becky lost her battle to cancer. Molly is with us. And so in spending time with her, she said, at one point we were having this conversation, and she said, "Listen with your eyes." And that just stuck with me. The power of mentorship is when you have a gap in your toolbox, you go to somebody, and that gap is filled because that other person has a tool or a resource. The better, the bigger, the more higher call to action is find sponsors. Find your advocates. Be relentless as a 22, 23, 28, 35, 52-year-old at finding those people that believe in you and that will guide you in your journey. They are invaluable.
I love that. It's so true. It's so true. My advocates, my mentors have been pivotal for me. And it's why I am sitting where I sit at Assemble, because Jill Katz and Jamie Delaney have been two of the most powerful mentors and advocates for me.
And Jill Katz, I had the privilege of doing an episode of this with her. And one thing that we talked about was parenting and how it's influenced us as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So one question for the both of you is, how has being a parent helped you in your career or made you a better leader?
Well, Maya's middle name is Joy. We affectionately call her our Chief Joy Officer. Becky also said to me that same day in that same boardroom, looking at that same spreadsheet, she said, "Your tombstone should not say you were the best buyer at Macy's." So at the risk of sounding post and end of life, for lack of explanation, what do you want your tombstone to say? What do you want people to remember you by? watching this little girl who is a mixed race, right? Not we adopted. We're very proud of that. We talk about that. She should know that she was born in our hearts versus our bellies. She was born in our hearts, right? And Maya is the future. She's who we're investing in. So looking at her every day is a reminder of why we work so hard to try and make this world a little bit kinder, a little bit more connected. That's what I would say. That's what parenting has done for me.
You are raising a wonderful human, and I have no doubt that she is going to change the world.
Thank you.
As a parent, everything I do are for my kids. As a Muslim American woman, I've grown up here in the US. I started wearing my hijab at 21 and entered the workforce wearing my hijab, like the true workforce. And I set out on a mission very early on after looking around and realizing that there wasn't anybody who looked like me in a leadership position. And there weren't really many people that looked like me, period. I knew a lot of people, including my own mother. Even I did it at some point earlier, like when I was like just doing some college work, where people took off their hijabs because they felt as though they couldn't be their authentic selves. And for me, my driving force are those kids, because I want my kids, especially my daughters, to see mommy did it in her hijab and is making a difference and is on a stage and is changing the world. And I can do that. Representation for me is everything. I just had a woman reach out to me on LinkedIn, a fellow hijabi, who said, I don't know her. And so she reached out to me and just said, I contemplated taking my hijab off in the workplace because I felt like nobody was taking me seriously. But I see you and I see your posts, and you reignited my commitment to this. And that was everything. And that is why I do what I do and why I sit here in this seat and having these conversations.
It's an amazing mom. It's an amazing mom.
I try. They keep me in my dog.
Yeah, they do.
They keep us all busy.
Yeah, they do.
Keep hurting.
There's no doubt about that. And one thing that I mentioned to Jill yesterday, Jill Katz, is after our podcast with her, she really inspired me to highlight that, and to your point, I'm a dad first and foremost. Mm-hmm. And I even told her like an anecdote of I updated my LinkedIn headline. Now the first thing is dad, because to me, my children are my world, and I'm totally at their whim and do what they want and try to keep up with them. But it's quite the journey to be a part of. The final question for the two of you before we end is, we've been on this fabulous retreat. What is a key takeaway that you've had from either the sessions or the conversations you've had on the side with people that you're meeting? What's one takeaway?
For me, this community is so powerful. It is a place where I truly feel like I belong. And so in all the conversations that I've had in the sessions, outside of the sessions, everybody's just kind. Everybody is working towards the same goal. And to be around people who are working towards the same goal, regardless of our different dimensions of diversity, we are walking similar paths within our professional lives. And so this is a beautiful community. And to be able to be in this beautiful space with the beautiful ocean and the sun and the palm trees and public city is just is everything. And I highly, highly recommend for anybody who didn't make it this year, please try to come next year.
+1 hashtag join the troop.
Yeah.
Tracy, Ava, and Nicole Feely and the whole team has just done a magnificent job of creating such a safe space to just be us.
Yeah.
And so we're doing the work and we're talking about the work and we're meeting great people along the way. I love everything Zamena just said.
Well, thank you both for being on the podcast today. It was a privilege, and I feel like the blooper reel will be funny.
Oh, yes.
But we got through it. And I appreciate you both being kind to me, trying to get through introductions, and also just being here. It's been a privilege speaking to the two of you.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the TroopHR podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating. If you would like to learn more about our community, please visit TroopHR.com. In the meantime, keep living the dream.